What's up, and welcome to another edition of Previews and Predictions here on the Say What You Like Sports Podcast. I am Philip Enriquez. I will be your host today. And in this episode, we are going to get into the NFC South. And like I mentioned in previous episodes, the NFC is straight stacked this season. And they usually are, but this season in particular, they seem extra stacked, if you know what I mean. Now, on the other conference in the AFC, it's pretty easy to paint yourself a picture of who are going to be the pretenders and who are going to be the contenders for those playoff spots. But in the NFC, man, it's wide open. There's going to be a lot of competition, so we got a lot to talk about, almost too much to talk about, if I dare even say, but you can never talk too much football, right? That's what we do this thing. That's why we say what we like here on the Say What You Like Sports Podcast. So, without any further ado, let's just get right into it. Let's talk about how I see the NFC South playing out for 2018. Starting off with my prediction for fourth place in the NFC South, I got to go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, I think this is the only easy call in this division. This is the only team in the division that really I can't say has a legitimate chance to challenge for the division crown. I just think there's way too many question marks, way too many negatives as opposed to the positives with this squad, at least going into 2018. Negatives. Let's get the bad news out of the way first. I think the inconsistency in the front office is going to bite this team in the ass this year. I mean, this team's been owned by the Glazers. They've had their ups and downs. They've had more than their fair share of mistakes with the franchise, and I think it's a trickle-down effect. It starts in the front office, down to the coaching staff, down to the 53-man roster, and then on to the suffering of the fan base, to be quite honest with you. I mean, they hired Lovie Smith a few years back, and they gave him, a 1 or 2 year stint. Really didn't give him a fair shake there. I mean, I thought that was something that was a questionable mistake. And he was the one that hired the GM, Jason Licht, back in 2014, and Jason Licht was the one that gave Lovie Smith his walking papers. I mean, what's going on there, right? I mean, just no consistency in the front office. So Jason Licht hires his offensive coordinator, Dirk Cutter, and Dirk Cutter's going to have a lot to prove in the 2018 season. He's going to have that challenge of providing some kind of consistency to this franchise. Now, another question mark is in the defensive backfield. I think when your best player is Brent Grimes, who's 35 years old, I mean, how long do you expect him to keep it up? He's no longer that premier player that he was in his younger days with the Miami Dolphins, but he's still a solid number one corner in this league. But like I mentioned, how long's that going to last, right? And the only other really safety or defensive backfield is a safety, I should say, of note, is the 2017 second-round pick, Justin Evans, who had 3 interceptions last season. So I believe the Tampa Bay coaching staff is really hoping that a player like Justin Evans can take that next step forward and really help out in the defensive backfield. Now, one of the bigger question marks of the season is the questionable leadership at the quarterback position. Now, notice I did not say anything about the quarterback play on the field. I think Jameis Winston is a quarterback who's the former number 1 overall pick and is more than capable of making big-time plays in big-time games. He's shown me that much. But off the field, it's starting to leak onto his on-the-field performance. I mean, you can go back to his days at Florida State, the BB gun battles in the Florida State dorm rooms, the rape allegations, the forgetting, quote-unquote, forgetting to pay for crab legs, right? I mean, he didn't just steal them. He just forgot to pay for them, right? Then, finally, in the offseason, it catches up with him. He's going to start the season with a 3-game suspension for inappropriately touching a female Uber driver. I mean, Jameis, it's time to get your head out of your ass, bro. You are the face of a franchise. The Buccaneers drafted you number 1 overall and are paying you millions of dollars to lead this franchise. So not only are you letting yourself down, but you're letting the coaching staff, you're letting the front office, and you're letting your teammates down by acting this way off the field And now it's going to affect you on the field because you will not be playing in the first 3 games of the season, and you do not have 3 games to give up, not in this division. Another question, the running back depth chart. I mean, they lost the muscle hamster, Doug Martin. Now, he wasn't all that the last couple of years, I'll admit, but when Jaquiz Rodgers is probably your best back on the roster, that's no good. He's a third down scat back at best. But let's talk about some of the positives. You know, there are positives for this squad. You know, I'm not a hater, not fully a hater at least. There's playmakers in this passing game. Jameis Winston has no excuses once he gets back from his 3-game suspension. I mean, he's going to be throwing to the tight end, O.J. Howard. I mean, he's looking to step up big. I like him a lot. Wide receiver Deshaun Jackson, he's still got that deep speed to make the big play to go fits very nicely with Jameis Winston's arm. They really didn't connect like they should have last season, but here's to hoping they can get on the same page because he's a dangerous weapon still in the league. And then you have the playmaker on the other side, Mike Evans, who just signed a 5-year, $82.5 million contract. So several standouts as far as pass catchers go in the for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. On the other side of the ball, you know, you got Gerald McCoy with 6 sacks. He's one of several standouts in the front 7 on defense. They signed up JPP over from the New York Giants, who has 58.5 sacks on his resume. And no, he's not the player that he used to be on the Giants prior to the fireworks accident on the 4th of July a few years back, but he's going to help to make this defense tough. He brings that toughness, and he's going to make that front 7 better, no doubt. But the true strength of this defense is the linebacking crew, where you got Quan Alexander, who, in my opinion, is just straight up one of the most versatile and athletic linebackers I've ever seen play. I mean, the dude missed 4 games and still ended up with 97 tackles on the season. So if that stat doesn't tell you how good this guy is, nothing's going to convince you. And he teams up with Levante David, who did lead the tackle with 101 tackles, to go along with 5 forced fumbles and 5 fumble recoveries. So Levante David is that kind of linebacker any team in the NFL would want to have on their roster, because he's one that can get the ball back for his offense. So going into 2018, look, I think this Tampa Bay team really needs a double-digit sack kind of pass rusher. They haven't had one since Simeon Rice in 2005. Now, I don't think the Bucs are necessarily a bad team, but there's just more questions than answers. And in this loaded NFC South, that's almost going to assure that lands them in 4th place. Unless Jameis plays lights out, I think it might be the end for him in Tampa Bay. My prediction for 3rd place in the NFC South for 2018 is the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers went 11-5 last season, finished 2nd in the division, and I don't see them taking a huge step back by any means. I can see this team finishing 10-6. It's just that I see the NFC South, the top 3 teams, as all being stacked. I just have a few more question marks for the Panthers than I do the Falcons or the Saints at this point. So let's start with the question marks. I think the lack of an effective running game is the biggest question mark for me for this team, because the other 2 teams in Atlanta and New Orleans, they have a running attack. Now, outside of Cam Newton, Carolina can't boast that. Jonathan Stewart was the best they had, who he only averaged 3.4 yards per carry, and he only had 5 50-plus yard games rushing last season. So I think that's an even more telling stat. Christian McCaffrey, the 1st-round draft pick, he only had 3 50-plus yard games last season. He's just not an in-between-the-tackles type of runner. Yes, he's excellent making plays out of the backfield, but he's not much of a runner. So that lack of a running game, I think, is what really puts this team behind the Falcons and the Saints. But can't stop there. I think another concern would be they released their safety Kurt Coleman, and they traded their cornerback Daryl Worley. And I think outside of that now, there's just a collection of unproven defensive backs. I mean, the only one I can name is the old safety Mike Adams, and I believe he's 37 years old this season. So, to me, just some question marks. Now, they have some young players on the roster that they're excited about, but they're unproven at this point. I can't bank on that happening. But I think maybe the other biggest question mark that's maybe not on the field, but just something that's more superstition, if anything. The Panthers have never, ever had back-to-back winning seasons. So after going 11-5, well, if time has told us anything and this stat holds true, it's time for a down season for the Carolina Panthers. However, I think there's a lot of positives. I think this team is definitely a playoff contender, and I can see this team winning the division if everything goes right for them. I mean, the front seven is just vicious. You got Julius Peppers, who's returning for a 17th season. The old man can still do it. He had 10.5 sacks last season. And on the other side, Mario Addison, he had 10.5 sacks himself. So this team is set at the defensive end position. And inside, the team did lose Star Lotulelei, but they added Dontari Poe. So I think they might have even improved in the inside with the addition of Poe, even after losing Star. And at the linebacker spots, you have one of the best linebacker duos in the league. You got Thomas Davis and Luke Kuechly. Now the keys are Kuechly has to stay healthy. He's had a problem with concussions and staying on the field the last couple of seasons. And unfortunately, Thomas Davis will start the season on suspension for a PED violation. So, that's just another little negative, even out of such a big positive, which is the defense for the Carolina Panthers. That front seven is stacked. No way around it. If all things go right, I think Carolina can return to the Super Bowl. I think Cam has to stay healthy, and I believe that Norv Turner just might be the difference. I think he's the offensive coordinator that can improve Cam Newton's play. And if you don't believe me, just see Troy Aikman and Phillip Rivers. He worked miracles with those quarterbacks. He gave them some of the best years of their careers. It's just, to me, I think it feels more unlikely that Kuechly and Cam can stay healthy throughout an entire season. And so I see this team finishing a very respectable third place in an absolutely loaded division, and maybe even more importantly, or more scarily for the Panthers, is a loaded NFC conference, man. It's going to be tough. This team can definitely do it, but they're going to have to answer all those question marks I just named off here in this preview and prediction. In at number 2, I have a team that took just a little bit of a step back in 2017, the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons, they finished 10-6 last season, made the playoffs, so not a bad season. But like I mentioned earlier, they did take a step back because this was the team that represented the NFC in the Super Bowl in 2016. And to me, I can't find any other reason than that big, glaring reason at offensive coordinator why things changed last season. So for me, I pretty much have one big negative with this team, one big question mark. But outside of that, there's not too much to worry about for this Falcon squad. I mean, I guess you could say the biggest question mark is, or the biggest negative is, it's no longer 2016. Kyle Shanahan is no longer the offensive coordinator for the Falcons. That's the biggest problem. Instead, you have Steve Sarkisian, the man who's best known for showing up intoxicated to practices at USC in Washington and giving that infamous drunken profanity-laced speech at the USC Booster Club event that eventually got him fired. And that's what you're looking at as your offensive coordinator. And the team took a step back on the offense last season. Matt Ryan's numbers took a huge dip from Shanahan's play calling to Sark's. I mean, he had almost half as many passing touchdowns. He passed for 849 fewer yards. And so for me, the biggest concern is this Sark and Matty Ice duo, they must get those numbers up. They have to if they want to get back to the Super Bowl. Matt Ryan, he got the big contract. He's the highest paid quarterback in the league. Or maybe he's not anymore. It seems like the highest paid quarterback in the league is like a merry-go-round and it changes daily. But he was at one point, if not still.
And, they needed to pay the guy. The Atlanta Falcons offense needs him, even if he's not the best quarterback in the league. That's just the way the business side of the NFL works. But he's got to get those numbers up, and Sark and him have to get on the same page. That's the biggest question mark. I mean, other than that, you have a few little maybe question marks there. I mean, Desmond Trufant, can he return back to form like he was back in 2016 before the injury? Because in 2017, to me, he just wasn't the same corner. So hopefully he can return back to that, Pro Bowl form in 2018. But other than that, I mean, there aren't any other glaring weaknesses or concerns on this team. The team is loaded. The team is stacked with talent. That's why they made the Super Bowl in 2016. The biggest question mark is the offensive coordinator and the offense. As far as the positives go, I mean, like I mentioned, it's everything else. This team is stacked with talent on both sides of the ball. I mean, they have arguably the best running back tandem in the league. You got Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman, and they can pretty much do it all. They got a pair of do-it-all running backs. They've combined for 1,493 yards last season, 12 touchdowns, and again, like I said, they do it all. That goes along with the 616 yards they had receiving and 4 touchdowns through the air. So, they account for a big part of those offensive numbers. Pair them with the first-round wide receiver Calvin Ridley. Pair him with Julio Jones, and who's arguably still the best wide receiver in the league. He had a little bit of a down year. So again, if you notice, it's just that the offense sort of regressed. But the talent's there. If you put that scheme in place and you put these players in the right position, I mean, they can be, historically, by the numbers, they were one of the best offenses of all time. And Julio Jones was a big part of that. So again, it's just hoping that he can get back to that 2016 type of level. They have a solid O-line. On the other side of the ball, Vic Beasley, you got him rushing the passer. He had a bit of a down year too, after a big 2016. His sack totals, went way down. But they did have a big positive finding. Deion Jones, a linebacker. I mean, every time I watched him play, he was making big plays in big games. So, the head coach, Dan Quinn, he's a defensive mind coming over from the Seattle Seahawks. And he has the ammo on defense to do what he needs to do. So I don't really see any big concerns there. I'm not saying they're the best defense in the league. They're not by far. But they got the weaponry. They have the talent to make it happen. And if that offense gets back to that historic pace they were on in 2016, there ain't no stopping the Falcons. The one question mark on an otherwise complete team for me is just a major one. It's, can Steve Sarkisian get Matt Ryan and this offense back on track? That's my only question in 2018 for the Atlanta Falcons. That's the one to watch. So now for my prediction on who's going to win it all in the NFC South. Who's left, right? The New Orleans Saints. New Orleans Saints went 11-5 last season. I mean, they were one of the favorites going into the playoffs to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. And I don't really see much changing, Outside of that Minnesota Miracle, they probably would have been in the Super Bowl. So, look, negatives, question marks. Trying to find them for this team is, again, difficult, kind of like the Falcons. The Falcons have that one big glaring weakness that you can easily identify. Not so much with the Saints, and that's why I gave them the edge over the Falcons here. I mean, some possible question marks is Drew Brees getting too old? I mean, he's 39 years old. How long can he keep it up? But you're seeing quarterbacks, the quarterbacks' lifespans are starting to extend into their 40s nowadays. So, I mean, no reason for concern yet. I mean, last season, Drew Brees had one of his best years. With that running game to support him, he definitely didn't have to shoulder the load. So, again, I don't even see that as a big concern. I mean, the quarterback threw 72% completion percentage last season. So Drew Brees was still doing his thing in his old age. You might question some of the wide receiver depth behind Michael Thomas and Ted Ginn Jr. Because I really can't name receivers outside of those two, the starting receivers. But again, Drew Brees has made it work with a variety and a number of receivers through the years. He just makes any ordinary receiver at least serviceable. That's just how great Drew Brees is. So again, how big of a concern is that? He's proven that time and time again. He can win with pretty much anybody at wide receiver. I think maybe the biggest question mark is starting off in the season is is how will the 4-game PED suspension for Melvin Ingram slow the Saints down? I mean, will it slow down that running game in 2018, or can Alvin Kamara shoulder the load all on his own? I mean, I really struggled to find a glaring weakness on this team. That's why I got to make them the favorites to win the NFC South. No other way around it. I mean, when I look at the team, it's like solid, solid, solid. I don't see a weak spot. Again, this is all barring injuries, of course. Like I mentioned, Alvin Kamara, he was the offensive rookie of the year. He can run, he can catch, he can do it all. And he's going to have to, at least for the first 4 games, without Melvin Ingram, his partner in the backfield. O-line is solid. D-line is solid. They have solid linebackers. But I think the biggest positive from last season was the improvement in the defensive backfield, where they had not just the offensive rookie of the year on offense, but the defensive rookie of the year on defense with Marshawn Lattimore. And I think he's got the makings of a shutdown corner. Again, it was just year one. You see a lot of cornerbacks have one good, solid year, and, you never hear from them again on that level. But, I mean, when I saw him play, man, what a difference, because the defensive backfield has always been the New Orleans Saints' Achilles heel. And he pretty much turned that around. Him and the free safety, Marcus Williams. Again, yes, Marcus Williams, he missed the tackle on Stephon Diggs. He was part of that whole Minnesota miracle. But otherwise, I mean, he had an impressive season. So I'm not going to judge the rookie based on one play. Yeah, it was a big play. Yeah, it was a bad play. Yeah, it got you kicked out of the playoffs. I mean, it was bad. I ain't going to lie. But to say that this kid doesn't have talent, or he doesn't have a future, or he hasn't been consistent, at least in his first year in the NFL, I mean, I can't go there. He did nice. In the end, I just feel like the combo of Drew Brees and Sean Payton is, without a doubt, the most proven combo within this division. And I think if the first-round draft pick, Marcus Davenport, can give you anything, if he can contribute early on, I mean, it's all bonus. They traded lots of draft capital to get this guy. And if he can contribute, put some pressure on the opposing quarterbacks, really, really solidify that defensive line, then this may be the number 1 seed in the NFC when it's all said and done. I know I wouldn't be surprised, because this team here is just that talented.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.